Hello guys, good morning everyone. Welcome to 21st Century IAS Academy online Indian economy classes. Today we are going to start a new chapter that is called investment models. Most of the things in this chapter we have already discussed in the planning chapter, because in the planning chapter we have talked about the planning commission and also we have talked about the different types of planning, especially the 5-year plans. And when I was talking about the second 5-year plan, I gave the information about the Mahalanobis model, which is one of the important investment models we ever implemented in our country. But this investment models, this is more theoretical in nature, but when it comes to the planning chapter, that was more practical in nature, which means the planning was the kind of investment model that we used in India, but here in investment models, what kind of economic systems or what kind of investment models are actually exist. So these investment models, we start with the known systems, that is communism, another one is capitalism, another one is pure free market. Generally we talk about economic systems in the world. It doesn't matter whether the country is following democracy or autocracy or a different political system, but an economic system is important and it is requirement to take that nation forward economically. So as part of it, every nation has to follow some economic systems, and if you look at this horizontal stretch, on the left side we have something called communism, and pure left, that is called pure planned economy, whereas in the pure right, that is called pure free market or pure free competition. Of course, these two extreme points, today there is no country existed, because in this world there is no pure capitalist country, there is no pure communist country, but generally if the capitalist principles are dominating, we call it as capitalist country, or if the communist principles are dominating, we call it as communist country. But there is no such thing like this country is purely communist or this country is purely capitalist. No, such things never happen. So in the economic systems today, generally we talk about communism, where you can give the example of China, and a bit right to the communism we can call socialist countries that are somewhat liberal when relatively compared with the communist countries, because in socialists the private property is allowed, but whereas in communists the private property is not at all allowed. But in the pure planned economy, as envisaged, of course Karl Marx envisaged this, that is called socialist learning, but Mao envisaged this, that is called communist. But some people who imagined of these communist societies, they should be completely under the government control. No private property is allowed, all the means of production must be owned by the government itself, and there is nothing called profit or there is nothing called private property aspect. So everything will be controlled by the government. So it's like a centralized authority, that the total economy is controlled by a centralized authority. But whereas when it comes to the pure free market, there will be no government intervention. The private players, they can do whatever they want, and completely it is depending on the Adam Smith concept of the laissez-faire, where a pure competition, even the morning drinking water you take, that is also supplied by the private players, and a satellite which is used for the communication purpose is also launched by the private players. So everything is private. So such type of societies also doesn't exist, but generally we have this capitalist societies, that is where you give example of United States of America and also most of our European countries, especially like UK, kind of countries, and a bit left to it, and with some capitalist plus socialist values. And for example, here this is capitalism, if you go left to it, which means you are adding social values or socialist principles. If you keep on adding socialist principles, then you will reach communist societies, right? And if you go even further, then you will get the pure planned economy, which doesn't exist in this world. For example, if you are here, North Korea, tomorrow if it adds some capitalist principles, then slowly it will become a capitalist country. So this is how actually economic systems we can classify in the world. So where is India? So that is the bigger question now. Once upon a time, India was at this place because we call ourselves as mixed economy, but today we are almost close to this place. Slowly we are becoming capitalist, and one day maybe we may become capitalist countries like United States of America. We never know. But before we go into that, first of all, let us explore some of the important economic systems that are mostly followed by these world countries. The first one is capitalism. I think a better explanation is not required because we have already discussed this capitalism in the planning chapter itself. But what exactly the capitalism means? The private property is allowed and the price mechanism is determined by the market forces, that is demand and supply, which means if you buy any good from the market, the price of that good is dependent on its demand and supply. It is not dependent on the government. So if that good is having a demand from the people or from the consumers, then the price will increase. If that good demand goes down because the consumers are not taking that good, then the price would also go down. So generally we call these two as market forces, that is demand and supply. So this price mechanism is completely determined by the private players or by the consumers. There will be no government intervention in this place. And the third one is freedom of enterprise. You have one entrepreneurship idea, you can develop your company, there is no problem in it. So the government intervention would be minimal. The government will create an environment in such a way all the players, all the private companies or any company, they can start any business in the economic system. So if you have an idea and if you have a capital and if you have the factors of production, certainly you can start a company. The government will just create an environment and an ambit of laws and an ambience so that these private players can start their business and earn some profits. So the freedom of enterprise refers to anyone can start any business. I can give you best example in that. For example, if you go to United States of America and if you take India, all of us know in India how much respect we give to the mothers, right? Especially pregnant women. So once a new baby is born, generally we advertise, of course from the government side, how sacred it is or how healthy it is to give that mother's milk to a child. And we see that mother's milk concept is as a very sacred thing, not only in our economic systems but also in our society and culture. But if you go to United States of America, recently I have read somewhere, they have started a company which pours this mother's milk, true mother's milk, in a Tetra Pak. And the way that you drink some of the things like fruity, etc., they also pour this mother's milk in a Tetra Pak. Can you imagine this type of company in our country? If you start that, the parties which are so concerned about the culture, society, values, but not development, of course, so they'll come and hit you and they will stop your company to function in this economic system. But in the United States of America, such things will never come. So the freedom of enterprise, you can start anything in those countries, and ultimate motive of starting those companies is always profit. Next one is competition. Generally, when the economic system is allowing more players to function, generally the competition arises, right? But that competition is a healthy competition, and when the companies compete with one another, then only innovation is possible. If the companies are not competing with one another, the innovation is not possible. in another way, a new technologies also won't come out. Today, because of this competition only, United States of America is becoming a bigger and bigger every time. Next one is profit motive. As I told you, private companies, they're always interested in profits rather than anything else. Sovereignty of the consumer. Consumer can also buy anything he wants. He no need to listen to the government. For example, if you see in our ration system, what we are doing, we are giving only rice to the South Indians. If it is in North India, they are only giving wheat. Apart from that, they will also give sugar, some other commodities, etc. Right? But in United States of America, there is no such thing. Simply, if the government even wants to give something to the people, they'll give in terms of money. It is purely consumer's choice what he wants to buy. If he wants to buy liquor, that is up to him. If he wants to buy food, that is up to him. If he wants to buy some other commodities, it is up to her. So it is completely sovereignty of the consumer. But in socialist societies, the sovereignty of the consumer is very much compromised by the governments. It is the government which decides what kind of goods that one has to access. But in capitalist economic mode of systems, this is not possible. Simply, the sovereignty of the consumer is very much protected, and it is up to the consumer what kind of commodities he wants to buy. And labor is also seen as a commodity. If one person is working in a company, he'll be just taken as a commodity, that's it. He'll be given salary, and that person is not concerned about how much profit that a company is getting, why not the company is sharing more profits to me, I should also be like a partner to the company. So such kind of thought process doesn't exist in the capitalist systems. But when it comes to the socialist systems, the primary part which discussed by the Karl Marx in his Das Kapital was this thing, that is called Shramadopadi. Right? These capitalist people, they're simply exploiting the hard work of the employees or the hard works of the laborers. So all the laborers or all the workers in the world, they must be united. So this is what the slogan given by the Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx in their Das Kapital concept. But in capitalist societies, this will never happen. In the capitalist societies, simply they say labor just see as a commodity. So if a machine is working and a person is working, there is no difference between them, that's it. So that is the kind of opinion these capitalist mode of systems will be having on the labor. But they will give you salaries, that's it. There is nothing more concerned than this as far as the labor is concerned. And there is one more thing. If you look at some of the differences between the socialism and capitalism, so that you will understand this better, when it comes to the ownership, the assets are owned by the private companies, but whereas here the assets are owned by the governments or cooperatives. Socialism or communism. Communism is even more strict in nature, much rigid in nature, but socialism is somewhat liberal in nature when relatively compared with the communism concept. And equality, income determined by the market forces. As I told you, it is all depends on demand and supply. How much demand for a person, then that much salary he will earn or she will earn. If the demand is less, then they will also get the less salary. So income is also very much determined by the market forces. So the concept of equality is not determined by the government, it is also determined by the private players itself. But here redistribution of income, the government will be having all the control on the companies or the means of production, and whatever the income that is being generating in the economy will be redistributed by the government to the people equally. So that is actually they believe in one thing, they believe in economic equality. If the economic equality comes, and then the social equality will automatically come. So this is what these people believe. So redistribution of income. Third one is prices. Prices are also determined by supply and demand and supply. So demand and supply, again I told you, they are nothing but market forces, right? So the price mechanism in the capitalist countries is always determined by the market forces. This is the point which I already explained you earlier. Now in the socialism, the price of any commodity or the price of important commodities, they are very much controlled by the government itself, especially food prices. How much the food prices must be in the market. This is not controlled by the market forces like demand and supply. How much the demand, how much the supply may be, it doesn't matter to me. Everyone has to sell a particular good at this price only. So this is what the determination of the socialist governments. So we must understand this also. And one more thing, that is called efficiency. Market incentives encourage firms to cut costs. So how efficiency comes? Generally you see, if you have some work with you, so when you are doing this work on your own, for example, it is costing you 100 rupees, and the next day you found a way, instead of 100 rupees, you can do this work efficiently in 80 rupees itself. If this profit 20 rupees is coming to your pocket because of this hard work and because of this exhibiting efficiency, you will do it, right? So that is what in capitalist systems. And the market incentives, they encourage firms to cut costs. And the private players, they always works for efficiency. They always works for efficiency. Why they work for efficiency? Because they want to cut down the costs. Once the cost of production is coming down, then the profits will increase. There is only two ways to increase your profits. One is cut down the cost of production, or cut down the number of employees who are working in your company. So second is not possible. So first one, once you cut down the cost of production by bringing some innovation or by bringing some efficiency, definitely the profits may occur or will occur. So market incentives encourages firms to cut the costs because they always look for the profit motive. But once here, government owned firms, they have fewer incentives to be efficient. I can give you a good example of this. Once upon a time in socialism, when the socialism was started fading in Russia, this thing was happened. For example, let's say 10 farmers, they have 10 acres of land, and all these 10 farmers, they have to work in their farmlands, but they don't own these farmlands. The farmlands are owned by the government itself, right? And whatever the income that is coming from these farmlands, that will go to the government's pocket. Government will give only salary to these 10 people. Let's say these people, they are producing tomatoes, and while packing these tomatoes, let's say some of the tomatoes have rotten, but they used to pack these rotten tomatoes with good quality tomatoes, because these farmers used to think, even if I sort them out, for example, in one bag or in one packet, there are 20 tomatoes. There is a place for 20 tomatoes. In that 5 tomatoes are rotten. So one has to remove these 5 tomatoes. Otherwise, the rest of the 15 tomatoes will also get rotten. In the meantime, if they get touch into another rotten fruit or another rotten vegetable, they'll also get this rotten smell and they'll also get spoiled. So, but he will not remove these, he will not sort out these 5 rotten tomatoes. You know the reason? If he remove these 5 rotten tomatoes also, is he getting a extra salary from the government? No. So why he will do some extra work without any incentive? You are recruited for some work and there is a scope for doing more work. Even if you do that more work, but still the government is paying nothing, then why to do that work? You can simply escape. Then what these people used to do, they used to pack these rotten tomatoes and with good tomatoes, and after some point of time, half of these other tomatoes also will get spoiled. So you will be having a few incentives. Government owned firms, they have fewer incentives to be efficient. That's why you see we have number of PSUs in this country. But if you look at the profits made by these PSUs, definitely that is coming down. But if you compare the same PSU with a private industry, for example, ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, Reliance, because Reliance also explores oil, And if you look at the profits, because of its size, ONGC may be bigger. But if you look at the profit percentages, Reliance is far better than the ONGC. Why? Reliance is private and the ONGC is government. Because the government, efficiency is a very strange word to them. When it comes to the private, efficiency is necessary. It's a requirement of their business. Because of efficiency, only the private firms they fare well. So we need to understand this. And taxes, limited, because the government also spend limited for the people. Because here the government is for bigger things like security, telecommunications, defense, etc. But when it comes to the social welfare, the government works very less. But now the governments are changing all over the world. Worldwide, the capitalist countries, they're also focusing on some of the socialist principles. But when it comes to the socialism, high progressive taxes, they will take more taxes from the people because they have to spend more on the public services. So this is the another thing. Healthcare, again, only free market, that is completely private hospitals, and you need to pay from your pocket. So that's why they'll go with insurance. You have seen the Obamacare, which was unilaterally cancelled by the Trump. I think now the Joe Biden will retrieve it, I wish. So in the capitalist countries, especially like United States of America, if any person is having any health care problem, if he is in need or if she is in need of some healthcare services, there is no concept called government hospitals. They'll always prefer and they will go to private hospitals. There is nothing called as government hospital. In these private hospitals, of course, the services are very costly. So that's why everyone in the country, they opt for medical insurances. So the insurance companies will take care of. So you don't need to pay even a single penny from your pocket, but every month you have to pay the premium to the insurance companies. So that is how healthcare services work there. But when it comes to the socialist countries, especially countries like India, because once upon a time we were so socialist, at least up to 1990s, healthcare is provided by the government, especially free at the point of use. But it doesn't mean socialist countries are bad. Cuba, it also followed socialism, but if you look at the healthcare of Cuba, it is much better than United States of also. But at the same time, North Korea also provides healthcare from the government. It is one of the worst in the world. So there are best in socialism, there are worse in socialism. In the capitalist system also, there are best in the capitalist system, there are also worst features in the capitalist system. But unfortunately, in the mixed economy concept, we were supposed to get the best features from the capitalism and best features from the socialism, but instead we got the worst features from the capitalism and we got the worst features from the socialism. So that is the biggest problem ever happened to the Indian economy. Anyway, so next one is problems. So because of more and more private involvement, because of more and more profit motive companies, because of existence of market forces, less involvement of the governments, definitely inequality increases, because whoever is having the purchasing power, they will only get the commodities. Rest of the people, they will be left. Okay, so inequality, especially any economic inequality, it would be more. A rich poor class division always happens in capitalist countries. So sometimes market failures. See, we use a word called crisis. This crisis is actually meant for capitalist countries. Crisis never comes in socialism. Of course, because today there is no pure socialist country. And if you look at China also, at least it is following some of the communist principles very closely. And when it comes to Russia also, socialist principles. These countries, they'll never go into crisis. But today if you see India, it is very much dependent on United States of America and it is also following some of the capitalist principles. That's why crisis is a word meant for the capitalist countries. Crisis, it happens only in the capitalist countries, to be frank. Because market failure. Because market is in the hands of privates. If the private players are not getting the profits, they will close down the business. But when it comes to the socialist or communist countries, all the means of production and the companies, they're completely in the hands of the government. So even if the market is so dull, the government will never close down the companies. Even at the loss, it will run. The best example in this country is BSNL. It is in ultimate losses, but still we are running it. Air India, it is in full of losses, but still we are running it. So that is the kind of socialist principles that we follow in these countries. Even at the loss, we always push the companies to function. But when it comes to the capitalist countries, this doesn't happen. And monopoly, you see, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Apple, all monopolistic companies. Once they invent something, once they discover something, and once they bring it to the consumer, they'll never allow any other players to rise. You see, WhatsApp, when the Facebook thought that WhatsApp is going to be a rival to the Facebook's Messenger, it bought that company with thousands of dollars, billions of dollars. So that is how it happens. And socialism, inefficiency of the state industry, less incentives. So there is a huge inefficiency of the state industry, as I told you. The government functions continuously, but with a lot of inefficiency. That's why we say no, government jobs are very good in India. Why? You don't need to go to the office. But recently now the things are changing. So less incentives also. Even if you work hard, the same salary you will get. You won't get any incentives. But in private sector, you can rise your position so easily with your hard work, I mentioned. So advantages, dynamic economy. Always it will look after the innovation and other things, and incentives for innovation. If you are inventing something, you are always welcome. And economic growth would be rapid. The GDP increase would be enormous. But the same thing is not possible. Here, promotion of equality. We always talk about this. Everyone must be equal. But I believe equality is not possible in this world. Attempt to overcome market failures. So definitely market failures is least possible in these economies because everything is under the control of the government itself. At last, we will see what are the pros and what are the cons in this capitalism. I think by this time you might have understood this concept. One is, in the capitalism, especially under the private sector control, because of the more and more incentives and because of more incentives for the innovation, the incentives to be rich encourage always innovation. For example, you have invented something called an iPhone, you will become the best billionaire in the world. So that is how the Steve Jobs worked out, right? Once he was kicked off from his own company, then in a small room, finally he invented something called as iPhone, and it revolutionized the whole world. Today, when compared with 1969 Apollo 11 satellite, the mobile phone in your hand with the internet is more powerful than that satellite today. In 2020, if you have a smartphone in your hand, that is more powerful than 1969 satellite. You can imagine how this actually changed this world. So if you have that innovation in your hand, so definitely there is always an incentive to be rich. The best example is Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, Alibaba, Flipkart in India, Amazon, and Elon Musk, and tomorrow some maybe else. So that is how. If there is an innovation with you, there is always an incentive to be rich. But that doesn't happen in India. In India, many kids, they have invented many things, but unfortunately they will never go to production. Why? Because there is no proper channel for investment. For example, if I have some entrepreneurial idea, to make this idea work out in reality, it is a great challenge. So investors, they will not be ready. Where is the term called angel investors in this country? Not possible. But if you go to United States of America, there people will allow you. You have an idea, investors will be ready. You know, from the school days, from the college days, once you come out of the graduation, the internships, they will be waiting, and the people from the companies, they will be waiting. But the same thing never happens in this country or in socialist countries also. So many people ask me question, sir, if that is the case, how China is developing? See, China uses communism only for politics, but when it comes to the economy, it uses neoliberal principles, more or less capitalist principles. Only for politics they use communism. And who must be the president of China? అక్కడ వరకే, అంతకుమించి ఏం చూడదు చైనా కమ్యూనిస్టులు. సో when it comes to the economic principles, China never follow communism. It always follows neoliberal principles. First అది తెలుసుకోండి. Anyway, whereas the second one, firms have the incentives to be efficient. Yes, if you are efficient worker, you will get more incentives. Consumers, they are very free to choose which product they want to use, and also it prevents large bureaucratic government. Definitely the bureaucratic government, everything, it won't be under the control of the bureaucrats, and better alternatives. It is better than other systems. And cons, firms can gain monopoly. So once it gains monopoly, it may exploit consumers. So definitely, so that is what it is happening, right? Whatever you speak in your WhatsApp chat, for example, let's say you try this thing, I want to buy a washing machine, you think like this, you chat something like this. Tomorrow some washing machine company advertisement will be visible in Facebook, so which means they're tracking your messages, isn't it so? So monopoly in the sense here, the companies, they are good, but they always remains to be good. They won't allow other companies to raise. Example, Facebook, Apple, Google, and Microsoft, etc. And firms with monopoly power can also pay low wages. So monopoly is different and monopoly is different. Okay, so the difference is, see, monopoly means when one company is the sole producer of a good or service, that is called monopoly. Monopoly means if a company is the sole purchaser of goods or services, then that is called monopoly. So firms with monopoly power, they can pay low wages. Monopoly means it is buying, monopoly means it is producing. So that is the difference, right? For firms with monopoly, if it is the sole buyer of a good, then it can pay very low wages. And externalities, they can damage the environment. So as I told you, externalities in the sense something like crisis or depressions, decrease in GDP, they can damage the whole environment. And not only that, normal environment also. Here the environment must be seen in two ways. One is biological sense and the one is economical sense. And biologically also, the environmental damage, it happens more in the capitalist countries. Why? Because they always exploit the resources in the name of innovation, right? And it tends to lead to large inequality, because rich and poor class divide always happens in capitalism. So it's huge in capitalist societies, and it prone to boom and bust. Boom means when the GDP is continuously increasing, it's called boom. Whenever there is a crisis, it comes down, it collapses like a play of cards, right? Bust, so collapse, complete collapse, that is called crisis. So it's prone to boom and bust in economic cycles. So this is what it is all about, capitalism. Okay, rest of the things in this chapter let us discuss in the coming classes. So stay tuned with the 21st Century IAS Academy online classes. Thank you. This is the end of class for today. If you have any questions or any comments regarding of today's class, you can always message me. That's it for today. Thank you.